the advertisements, this Eucharist is making use of the music and mythology of Bowie, and especially his Ziggy Stardust persona. I've followed Bowie for longer than I've followed my friends, and in many ways they're pretty interconnected. Now that might seem strange to some people, but actually I'll explain. The Ziggy Stardust album is essentially a story about a Martian rock star who comes to Earth to entertain humanity during the last 5 years of its existence, and who comes to believe that he is the prophet to someone who he terms the Starman that would save the world. He ends up rocking himself into oblivion and committing rock and roll suicide. And the Ziggy album follows the entire story, beginning at the 5 years, setting the scene with 5 years, and ending up with rock and roll suicide. Now please don't misunderstand me, especially all of you who will watch this via YouTube. Don't misunderstand this mass, or Ziggy Stardust and myself who put it together. Sorry about that. I'm most definitely not trying to make any fake claims about Bowie's Ziggy Stardust album or Bowie. I am, however, fascinated by the concept and do see some very helpful parallels between Ziggy and Christ stories. There are also many divergences. Some of the points of divergence are actually quite useful in themselves. In fact, I've added a few of them into this liturgy, so see if you can spot them when we come to them. But before we move on to the liturgy itself, I want to tell the story of Ziggy Stardust through the words of David Bowie. He was interviewed, and this is what he said about his character and his story. The time is 5 years to go before the end of the earth. It has been announced that the world will end because of lack of natural resources. Ziggy is in a position where all the kids have access to things that they thought they wanted. The older people have lost touch with reality, and the kids are left on their own to plunder everything. Ziggy was in a rock and roll band, and the kids no longer wanted rock and roll. There's no electricity to play it. Ziggy's advisor tells him to collect news and sing it because there is no news. So Ziggy does this, and there is terrible news. And that song, All the Undoes, is actually about this. The end comes, and the infinite arrive. The infinites arrive. They are really black hole people. But Bowie made them the people because, and not black holes, because it would be very hard to explain black holes on stage. Bowie continues, Ziggy is advised in a dream by the infinites to write the coming of the Starman. So he writes the song Starman, which we're all familiar with, which is the first news of hope that the people have heard. So they latch onto it immediately. The starmen that he's talking about are called the infinites. They are black hole jumpers. Ziggy's been talking about this amazing spaceman who will be coming down to save the Earth. And they arrive somewhere in Greenwich Village. They don't have a care in the world and are of no possible use to us. They're just happening to stumble into our universe by black hole jumping. Their whole life is travelling from universe to universe. Now Ziggy starts to believe that he himself is a prophet of the future starmen, and he takes himself up to incredible spiritual heights and is kept alive by his disciples. When the infinites arrive, they take bits of Ziggy to make them real, because their own original state, they are antimatter, and they can't exist in our world as antimatter. So they tear pieces off him, and that's when we come to the song Rock and Roll Suicide. As soon as Ziggy dies on stage, the infinites take his elements and make themselves visible. Now the character of Ziggy was inspired by British rock and roll star or singer Vince Taylor, whom David Bowie met. And Taylor had a breakdown and believed himself to be a cross between a god and an alien. So there are lots of interconnections, obviously lots of divergences as well. But throughout this liturgy, I'm going to be adapting lyrics from Ziggy and other Bowie songs. I'll be referring to God as the infinite and to Jesus as the Nas. And notice in the song Ziggy Stardust, Bowie, the lyric is he was the Nas, with God given something. And people have been debating what Bowie meant by that. People have different understandings, but I'm going to use the term as Nazarene. And occasionally I'll use the term Starman to refer to Christ, which is, I believe, a different aspect of the Jesus character. And also to evoke the idea of the divine feminine, I'm going to use the term the Lady, or Lady Stardust. I hope this doesn't sound too weird. So we shall begin. The infinite is here.
His image lies within us.
The Starman has arrived.
His power is within us.
The Lady is here.
Her grace is among us.
And we stand to sing the hymn Starman. We stand.